Okay, so I wrote this title and then forgot about it, and then realized that it's pretty useless for what I'm going to say, so I'm going to talk about something slightly different. So let's say half a year ago, we decided we need, well, we were given a task to write a new site, and we decided we want to do something awesome, so we wrote an isomorphic site with React, because we like React. So how many people here know something about React in a sense that they wrote something in React? Okay, so I'm going to do a really brief introduction, and then I'm going to go much deeper, so it'll be fun. If you don't know anything, well, if you feel lost, then just raise your hand and shout, and I'll try to accommodate for you. So this is a very small part of a React class. The closing tags are omitted because I couldn't fit them. And all the files are from Manifold, which is an example app for our framework that I'm going to talk about. So you can actually go onto my GitHub profile and see the file without, well, or with the closing brackets. So essentially, we import React. This is ES6 because we are the cool kids. So you import React and then define some style, because why not? And you export a React class. So on line 3, you create a class. And there is a render function, which is a minimum thing that must be in React. So what it does, essentially, when it's rendered on the page, is it creates a div that has a style, which is an inline style, which is actually a good thing, but that's a totally different talk. So it has an inline style with some margin, and it displays its children. So if you looked in the file, the layout file is actually used to wrap different components inside of it. So it enforces a layout. I guess it's 80% of the features that React gives on this small thing. Thank you. So I have a feeling that if you don't know what React is, you still don't know, but well, I'll just continue. So isomorphism, it's a really cool word, I think, pretty meaningless, but it's a good buzzword like big data or the cloud, so we keep using it. So essentially the idea is there are two isomorphisms. So many frameworks, they say they are isomorphic, and it's a good thing, but what it actually means is that you can run the code on the client and on the server and it won't crash. So say Lodash is an isomorphic library because you can run it here and there. But this isn't really the isomorphisms we were looking for. So what we actually wanted to do, and we achieved for the most part, is that you write a site and you don't care where it runs. If the client supports JavaScript, it's rendered on the client. If it doesn't, it's rendered on the server. If it's a search engine, it's rendered on the server. And when we started, there was nothing like that. Like people started to talk. That's why we had the idea. Now there is one more framework that I think it's cool, in a sense that I would like to use it. I have to use our framework, so I like it. And I think those are two major ones where you actually get the support for isomorphism, apart from, you know, oh yeah, we run this code on the server too, but sometimes we don't, sometimes we do, and it's more or less sketchy. So yeah, there are certain advantages. So first of all, the biggest advantage, and the only real one, I think, is the fact that when you render the page for the first time and the user doesn't have a fiber connection, it's there in, let's say, 50 milliseconds. So it's there as fast as your database can push it forward, essentially. Because you don't download you do download the blob, the whole 10 megabytes or whatever of JavaScript you have there. But the page is there in the first request. And then once the blob is downloaded, it bootstraps onto the page that's already there seamlessly. So the corollary of that is that if the page does not, or if the browser does not support JavaScript, in most cases, the user should have the same experience, unless you do something that it's interesting. So if you do something that requires in-browser operation, of course, it will not be rendered and the experience will not be the same. But you can very easily keep the experience the same if you do stuff that's, quote, simple. So if you want to do an email client that works in the browser and is really fast, but can also work on the phone from the 90s with no changes whatsoever from the programmer's side, you can, and it's pretty easy, but that's not the point of this framework. So the point of this framework is mostly the first two. So the very fast operation at the first kind of entry to lower the time for the user to actually see the page, and the optimization for the search engines. Because I'm told search engines run JavaScript, so notably Google does, but apparently the other people tell that it assigns a lower search rank for the pages, that are only client-side rendered, for the reasons that it takes time to render the page and so on and so on. The users don't like it. So supposedly it gives you better search engine optimization for free, let's say. So yeah, as I said, there was nothing, now there is something, and we think that our something is better than other Flux frameworks that are out there, in some places by a good margin. So what we want to do, and the framework is still in a very active development, so if you have any point, any bug, any whatever, just open a GitHub issue and we'll try to fix it. So what we actually want to do is to make Flux as easy as possible, while at the same time keeping the isomorphism around to as high degree as possible, because that's what we're paid for. Sorry, so now I'm going to talk about Flux, and this will be an example of B2B UX, let's say. So can I move over there, or will it crash everything? Can I move over there? Yeah, okay. So when the page is rendered, it starts with a component. So the component is the thing that I showed you at the very beginning. It wants to get some data. So it posts some actions creators. So it essentially tells the server, in every case, that, hey, I want some data, and it's this, this, and that. So the action creators talk to the API, in our case. So, oh yeah, so what I'm describing here is our version of Flux. It's slightly different from other versions of Flux. But we like it. So it talks to the API, and then once it gets the data, oh, I can actually, okay. And once it's done talking to the API, it goes into an action, and then the stores are populated. So the stores are the actual places where the component can get the data from, and then the component gets the data from the stores, and probably does something else, and the cycle repeats. And probably stops at some point. So what we changed mostly is that many frameworks, they ditch the action creator and they essentially treat the action as a label. So the component, in their case, says something like, oh yeah, get posts, and then the stores do everything. But we think that there is a much better separation of concerns in our solution, because the actions are the actual things that get the data, and the business logic is in the stores, or the actual shuffling of the data around. So yeah, I also feel that if you didn't know what Flux is before you came here, you still don't. But hey. So the action is this thing that gets the data, and in our case, there are multiple states it can be in. So if it's an asynchronous action, so it asks the server about something, there are multiple states. So you can actually listen to something that happens before the action and after the action, and then you can listen to the actual action happening, which gives you multiple options. Like you can, I don't know, show a loader before the action is actually posted to the server, and then only take it down afterwards, not when you actually receive the data. And there is a different behavior when the data is fetched synchronously. Yeah. So yeah, I was talking about the stores and the actions, but I didn't actually tell you what those are. So this is an equivalent in ECMAScript 6 of just module exports. So you essentially, it's a file and you export a store that holds the data, and it listens to the post's get all action. And on this action, when the data is received, it gets this data and it runs the get all function and feeds the data to this function, and it sets the state to be post. So the post is hopefully a list of things, and it will replace this default list of nothing with something. And you can listen to this change in your component in turn. So this change is propagated all the way from the server to the component without any explicit bound. So the code for getting stuff is not in the component, and there's one directional data binding and so on, all the advantages of Flux. So I've got a feeling, I said it to myself back home, and I thought, oh yeah, that's a very good presentation, but now I'm here and I feel that I'm going into very much technical detail and you don't know the high level. That's right? Yeah. So let's maybe stop with that for a second. We don't have a blackboard, so I'm going to hand wave. So the whole idea in Flux and React is that you have one directional data binding. So in here, you don't have this crazy idea that you have something in your view and it writes to your business logic, and then the business logic writes to your view, and if you have multiple things in your scope, then everything explodes and you don't know where the bug stems from. I'm not talking about Angular here. In this case, the component says, oh yeah, I want to get some data. It says very explicitly, I want to get some data, and it gets this data from a very different place. So you can actually, even if you don't know the code, you can take a look and you see, oh yeah, so this component is guaranteed to only get the data from this single store. And it will never see the data in this store, it will never see the data in this store, and it will only ask for the data with that's provided by the given action creators. So essentially your scope is very limited because you don't have to know anything about the whole system. You only need to know what's in this store and what's in probably multiple actions that this store asks for. And you know everything about what this component is going to do. And unless you do something very fancy, it's guaranteed that nothing else will happen. So if you're a programmer and there is a bug, it's usually way simpler to find it because you know it's not going to stem from here, it's not going to stem from here, and probably not from any of the actions that are there. So yeah, so this you probably will read if you actually want to do something with this framework. It's pretty useful, but probably useless now. And that's a fun fact. So we have a global object. Well, it's not global, but there is one object called FluxUp, and you get all the data, all the stores, all the actions from it, and it's all fine on the client because you have one window and the scope of different tabs is limited. But what happens on the server? Because as I said, all the pages are actually rendered on the server for the first time, even if the client supports JS. So there is a fun thing on the server. We actually didn't realize that for the first day, and then everything crashed and burned, and we did. So on the server, if you post multiple actions and they write to multiple stores, and those objects are singletons essentially, and you have multiple requests coming in, and they're all waiting for the database. So you get some data, and then the data is written to the stores at the same time from multiple places, and you just get garbage because of the requests. They overwrite and the stores, and they with different parameters and different data, and essentially what you get here is random. So we don't want that. So what we provide on the server side is essentially a small context for a request, and all the actions and everything is posted on this context. It's very cheap to make, reasonably. So it shouldn't slow down if you're really performance-oriented. Once Node gets support for event loop context, we'll move to that, but it doesn't now. So you actually have to be mindful that this context exists, and those things will run in parallel on, or concurrently, on the server. So you have to be mindful of that. And we give you certain things apart from the main library. So you have the Flux and React and on all the server-side isomorphic rendering, but it wouldn't be complete without the fetcher. So, because it would be all fine if you, it would be pretty awful if you actually, could render everything in both places, but then every time you get something from the server, we would have to check, oh yeah, am I on the server or am I on the client? Should I inject a request into the server or make a HTTP request? So this would suck. So we give a fetcher to you that's context aware. So the biggest problem with running things concurrently on the server is that you have to be aware of the context. And so you have to support our library, and there's one fetcher that does, which is written by me. So it should be very straightforward to add your own backend or backend of the front end to it. So currently we support Happy on the server and jQuery on the client for the transport. Essentially, each transport is, I don't know, around 50 lines. So if you want to support anything else, then it should be really straightforward. But all the handling of the context is done transparently, even if you want to implement your own transport. And we also give you a router that also has to support the contexts. So the router keeps its data in the stores as everything else. And it uses the actions to change the route. So you can watch those in the same way. So it's completely transparent if you want to integrate it into your architecture. You can use any other router, but with this it'll be most painless, hopefully. And yeah, there are certain caveats. So as I said, as I tried saying all the time, if you really want to go fully isomorphically, you'll have a problem when you have an interaction with a user, because if you type in a text area, there is no way without JavaScript or without some crazy hacks to actually ask the server for something transparently if there's no JavaScript. So if you really want to go fully isomorphic, you probably won't be able to. But if you treat this isomorphism as a bonus, I think it's completely transparent to the user. I'll show you in a moment on the real code how it looks, and it hopefully will be clearer. And the authentication is a bit of a red herring, really, because if you think about it, there is a request that comes in, and there is a rendered page that's returned. So this request must already be authenticated, because otherwise, if it wasn't, if it was a token-based authentication or whatever, then the first request would not be authenticated, and then you would need to download the blob and post the authenticated request, and the isomorphism would be broken. So the only real reasonable thing to do is to have a cookie-based authentication. So probably you just store some session data or session ID in the cookie and everything else somewhere else. And that's also written in one way. You can probably do it in 50 different ways. So you just have to import something just to have it. And yeah, I know it sounds pretty scary. So I'm talking about a gazillion of packages that we provide. But what I hope that solves all those problems is the example app. So I wrote an example app for that. It's a blog, a very, very, very poor man's clone of Ghost. Essentially, I'll show you in a moment. And I'm very happy for you to copy paste. It's MIT licensed. So you can just take stuff out of it and see how it works in your applications. So this is the example app, which I'll show in a moment. And the Flux app itself, so the framework is well documented, or at least we hope so. So you can take a look at that, and at all the packages. You can just make a Frankenstein out of manifold, really, and take even a build system out of it. And yeah, there's one thing that we lack, and we haven't found an elegant way of doing it. So essentially, if you want to pass the state on the server side onto the client side, and you want to do it transparently, it's not possible currently. So this is a bit of a hiccup we have. We have some ways to do it very awfully. We haven't found an elegant one. So if you have an idea how to do it, then let us know. So about the practical thing that's maybe going to clear stuff up. So that's the example up. So we have a post. That's the example Markdown post from Markdown site. So this is a site. Yeah, there is some text and there's a post. You can show more. So this navigated in the client to a new route, which displays some more stuff. There are some bugs because I'm escaping everything and I didn't notice it until half an hour ago, so yeah, whatever. Yeah, you can go back. You can log in. So the password is admin by default, right? And you can edit that. You can update that, and there's no navigation to the main page because, whatever. So, and it's there. And just to show you that I'm not cheating, and this is actually because all the navigation that you've seen is client side, right? So let's open something ridiculous now. Like, I don't know. Yeah, so this does not support JS. Actually, I'm pretty interested if this is going to work. Oh yeah, so this works. So even if the user of your website is Richard Stallman, he'll still be able to use this thing and even log in. The login also works. As I said, it's pretty crazy to do everything isomorphically, so the admin panel is not. The admin panel it will use the isomorphism for the first render, but without JavaScript, you will not be able to do anything. Yeah, so if you have any questions.
Okej. Po polsku czy angielsku wolisz pytanie? Może po polsku idziemy. Okay, so I can see that you wanted to cut some loading time, and on average, I expect you did some metrics.
No, actually, we didn't. Because the page that we actually did it for is not yet public because we are adding stuff and a host of different reasons. But the blob for the blog is, so all the JavaScript libraries are like 4 megabytes. Which compresses down to 500 kilobytes. So if you're on mobile, it's definitely too long, essentially, because this could take, if it was just client-side rendered, as you probably know, it could take, I don't know, 5 seconds if you're unlucky. So, and in this case, it will take probably, I don't know, 10 milliseconds to get it. So that's a change. So we essentially, we want to cut super bad experience for the mobile user. So actually, I think an interesting thing is, what if the browser supports JavaScript, but cannot actually get the blob from the server? So until the blob is actually fully loaded, it will behave as a server-side app, completely transparently to the user, assuming you're in the isomorphic part. And once you get the blob from the server, you'll go back, or you'll go forward to the client-side rendered, and all the, I don't know, navigation and everything will be client-side rendered, completely transparently to the user and to the programmer. So you actually don't have to care, because there's a lot of really stupid edge cases you have to think about when you do the navigation.
Any other questions?
Yeah, a good question is, I didn't understand anything. Just explain it. Also a good question.
Yeah. Can you explain again Flux?
Oh, I see. So the idea is you have one directional data flow. Oh, this was irony. Oh, I see. I need irony sign in real life too. Okay, thank you.